This is why I'll never play the Ouija board again. It was 1964 and my sister and I were 13-year-old identical twins. We were living with our mother in rural Scotland. Parties were all the rage in the 60s, and this night was one of those nights. The house we lived in was a 3-story building, with living quarters planned out on the top 2 floors. The ground floor of the residence was a gathering area for the village's communal meetings or various parties my mother occasionally hosted. My sister and I were left upstairs for the night while our mother hosted her party. We could hear all the murmured voices pass compliments to one another, muffled by the floorboards between us. It wasn't long before voices became loud music and thuds, caused by what we considered to be dancing. My sister and I were bored, to say the least. Our mother firmly told us to be quiet and behave for the duration of the night. My mother was strict but loving, so making her angry was the last thing we wanted to do. When we were good girls, she made it a thing to make us aware of it by buying us gifts. It had just celebrated our birthday a few weeks before, and she had bought us both a life-size doll. This thing was huge. It towered over my sister and I, but we both loved it. It was around 6 foot tall with long red, string-like hair, and it had a small stitched mouth and 2 round buttons for eyes. We kept the doll in the wardrobe, with it being too huge for the bed. My sister suggested we play with the doll, and as much as I wanted to, I suggested that we play something else. At school, all the girls were talking about playing a Ouija board, how amazing they are and what they can do. Once I heard about these boards, I was hooked. I saved up my allowance, and over the weeks, I bought one secretly to surprise my sister, and this is the perfect time to reveal my surprise to her. So when my sister replied to my suggestion, "What shall we play?" I ran upstairs and pulled the board out from under my bed and ran back down. I presented the board as they do prizes on the TV game shows we watch with our mother on Thursday nights. At first, my sister was dead against playing it, worried our mother will find out and be angry. It didn't take very long to persuade her to play, and soon we cleared the table and set up the Ouija board. My sister and I placed our hands on the planchette and began to ask various questions, inciting spirits to come forward. The planchette moved. We looked at one another, both our faces straight, and then we both giggled out loud. We knew that we had moved it ourselves in an attempt to frighten one another. My sister suggested we turn out the lights, so we both jumped up and began to turn all the lights in the house off. "I'll grab some candles," I shouted to my sister. "And I'll grab some Mum's jewelry," my sister replied. A few minutes later, all the lights in the house were out, and the candles we placed around the table were lit up. They cast an orange glow on the Ouija board, complementing the mood. My sister and I were now confident. We sat face to face at the table and placed our fingers on the planchette. The house was quiet, and any sound that could be heard was that of muffled voices and music playing from downstairs. With our hands on the planchette, my sister and I began to ask the same set of questions we asked before, and prepared for some sort of experience. We looked at one another and paused for a moment. Nothing happened. I felt so annoyed. My sister was visibly shook up and expressed her anxiety. "I want to stop, Julie. Something doesn't feel right." We both took our hands off the planchette without ending the session correctly. I remembered the girls at school stating that you should always end the session with a Ouija board. I expressed my concerns and told her that we need to finish the session correctly. It was too late. My mother came rushing upstairs and seen us both by the table with the Ouija board out. She wasn't happy from the moment she walked in. I don't know what happened. We were quiet and she hadn't seen her jewelry on the table at this point. I can't remember what she was going on about, but I noticed her white dress had been painted red. I remember asking her if I could come down and paint with everyone. But once she had seen the Ouija board set out on the table, she broke down crying. She was so upset when she locked the door, she slammed the deadbolt shut. She turned to us with a finger pointed out sharply and sent us both to bed. My sister and I went to bed with our heads hung low. We took ourselves to bed and discussed why our mother was so upset. It wasn't long before she came into our room and turned out the lights. She shouted at both of us, "Get to sleep, both of you, and don't leave your rooms or this house before I say so, okay?" My sister and I didn't say a word and slammed our heads on the pillows and closed our eyes. I felt awful for upsetting my mother, but I couldn't get the sound out of my head. It was scratching. I could hear scratching. I whispered over to my sister, "Can you hear that?" She whispered back to me, "Yes, I thought it was you." Instantly, my stomach felt tight and knotted. That wasn't me. My sister jumped out of bed and ran to the bedroom light, flicking it on. The moment the lights went on, the scratching stopped. My sister and I, through the process of turning a light on and off for a while, every time the light was turned off, the scratching persisted. Eventually, I thought enough was enough. We were both too frightened to sleep with the light off, so I went downstairs to get Mum to help us. I ran downstairs hectically looking for my mother, and I couldn't find her anywhere. I searched the middle floor, going from room to room. Eventually, I made my way back to the bottom of the stairs and noticed the door leading downstairs was unlocked and opened. I slowly approached the door when I heard my sister come running downstairs to me. She was screaming, "It's gone!" She ran to my arms and I embraced her. "What's gone?" I asked her. She jumped out of my arms and began to explain theatrically that the doll had disappeared. She said it had opened the wardrobe and had run down so quickly by her that she couldn't see it move. She had tears rolling down her face. Suddenly my mother came stomping down the stairs. "Why are you out of bed?" she was shouting at us both. "Why is this door wide open?" she was asking, question after question. We also explained that the doll had gone missing. My mother was visibly shocked and ran down to the ground floor. My sister was sat on the floor with her arms wrapped in her knees. I told her to stay put, and I followed my mother. I ran down the stairs to the ground floor and saw my mother and the doll. She was crying and pulling out a knife of the doll's hand. There were bodies all over the room, and what I thought was red paint all over the place. In hindsight, it was the same as what was on her white dress. She looked up and noticed me watching her. "Bed! Get now!" My mother screamed at me with her finger pointed at the stairs behind me. I knew I was in the wrong, and I felt I had to do as I was told or I'd be in trouble. I made my way back up to my sister. She was still sat by the door with her head in her knees. "Come on, sis, we've got to go to bed." I held my sister by the hand and we went to bed. We left the light on and the wardrobe open. My sister and I were discussing what had happened when we heard the door downstairs being slammed shut and bolted. Our mother came into our bedroom and the lights turned off involuntarily. My mother let out an audible gasp. My sister and I picked up on our mother's distress and instantly screamed. A gust of wind filled the room, sending shivers down my spine. With the room being pitch black, we were left with no visuals to accompany the breeze flowing around the room. The swooshing sound came to an abrupt end with the wardrobe door being slammed shut. Again, my family and I gasped. We were too frightened to move. A silent pause filled the room for a moment, when it was interrupted with the light suddenly flickering back on. Nothing else occurred that night for us. My sister and I soon fell asleep with the lights on, despite the weeping from our mother's bedroom. The next morning was quiet for a school day. Too quiet. I climbed out of bed and looked out the window. The streets were empty. All the cars that were parked here the night before were still all parked in their places. My mother came into our room and marched to the wardrobe. She opened it wide, and I ran round behind her to see what was inside. The doll stood there, towering over me. It had red stains all over it, and one of the buttons had been ripped off, leaving an X stitched on its face where the button I once sat. Its stitched smile had been stretched higher on its face. My mother didn't hesitate to grab the doll and drag it outside to the back of the house. I ran to the window and witnessed my mother burn the doll. I still swear to this day I heard it cry out in pain with its arms waving frantically. I walked back over to the wardrobe door my mother had left open. I saw deep scratches etched into the inside of the door. I ran my fingers down the scratch and pulled out a fingernail. There was a fingernail stuck into the wood. I didn't know what to make of it. My mother came back upstairs and began to pack our suitcases. "We're leaving today." That was all my mother would say. Shortly after, she pulled us both out of the house and into the car. I saw all the bodies laying on the ground floor. I knew they were dead. I wrapped my hands around my sister's eyes as we made our way to the car. We left that village behind and moved 100 miles south, where my mother brought us up in a small council house. That was 40 years ago, and that's why I'll never play a Ouija board again. I have never since been online and checked out the little village I grew up in. The village took me weeks to find. It was buried well, but what I found horrified me to my bones. I found out that everyone in the village was murdered with a kitchen knife during a party one night in 1964. They recently took DNA analysis on the murder weapon and couldn't find any fingerprints. The murders still remain a mystery today. However, what was weird about the murders was that everyone who had been killed had their fingernails ripped off. Whoa, okay, that was why I'll never play the Ouija board again, and credit to Ross Wilde. That last sentence there actually somehow gave me chills down my spine. Ugh. So this is I guess you could call it a ritual pasta to an extent, like it's using a Ouija board and stuff. My only complaint really with it was sentence structure and some punctuation in that, and misspelling. And I guess, like, maybe this person doesn't have English as their, like, first language sort of thing, so it's kind of easy to not sentence things out properly, but I was still able to make out what it meant, and there's a few adjustments I made when I read it as my version, but you can still get what it is meaning to say, even though it's not said correctly, but still tells a creepy story. Pretty interesting, and like I said, that last line actually sent chills down my spine, so it was kind of a great finish off for sitting here in the dark reading this. Good times. So yeah, let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. If you liked it, leave a like. If you dislike it, dislike it. Subscribe to this channel, hit the bell to get notified. You can also join my Discord, the link to do so is in the description below. Share this around to give your friends a scare. But as always, thank you so much.